Hey everyone, this is Dr. Pete. Just touching base on this Unit 8. And the focus here, and just to kind of talk about some things, domestic and foreign policy. Sometimes anymore, it's like, really, what's the difference? You know, the world, like when we first started off and we're just this country and we're isolated, you would say, okay, we have a domestic policy. We might build some roads, some waterways, maybe have a standing army, things like that, right? And the foreign policy was kind of clear. Hey, trade agreements, war, things like that, right? And so we kind of had that going on, diplomatic things and alliances and all that. So it's kind of like real clear, right? But now all of a sudden in today's world, we see a lot of blurring or blending of things. Like, what's the difference between the foreign policy and the domestic policy and say energy? Well, if we produce more oil or more coal or more solar power, green power, whatever power you like, doesn't matter, then what happens with the foreign policy? That could change things. Like, well, we don't really want a lot of oil coming in, or we don't want a lot of this coming in because we have it so close to home. Or he may say, well, we have a domestic energy policy, but we have to include Canada and Mexico because of their natural resources, right? So that can bring in a whole nother, like, well, is it domestic? Well, yeah, it's domestic, but it has elements of foreign, right? Or we sit there and say, hey, we're going to have a domestic policy of protecting the continental U.S. CONUS along with Hawaii and Alaska, but we're also going to make NATO, and that's a foreign policy. But we're also doing it for what? Protection of the United States, right? So like, there's all these different policies that could be seen in different ways, different concepts. One policy might say, well, you know what? We're going to have America first, American-made products being bought by government, this, that, whatever. But then that hurts. That in essence becomes a foreign trade policy, right? So there's it blurs a lot, and so we have to kind of think about, well, how does that work? For example, another one, healthcare. We could say, well, healthcare, we need more doctors and nurses, and we're having problems with that. So instead of focusing a domestic policy on how do we have homegrown and we have so many people and how do we do that, we might have a branch off of foreign policies, visas, that allow people to come over that are doctors in other countries and allow them to come over and be doctors. That helps our domestic policy to solve some of the deficiencies in medical care or doctor care and things like that. So there's all these policies that can really, on the surface, could be seen as one thing, but wind up quite literally being another, right? Or it might start off one way, like, hey, we want to protect the United States from a very aggressive country, and so we'll build up our domestic policies and all that, and national defense, oil reserves, all this stuff. And then, oh, by the way, it's gotten bad enough, we're going to extend that now to a foreign policy and go take that country out, or to project military power to make sure it's clear what's going to happen, right? So sometimes we tend to silo things quite a bit when in essence we should probably try to branch them out just a little bit more. So when you're looking at the ideas of um, foreign and domestic and things like that, uh, presidents especially are sensitive to that because they really control the realm of foreign policy for the most part. They have the diplomats, they have the Secretary of State, they have all this power and influence and law behind them and constitutional power to do these things. Whereas Congress doesn't really have that role, and nor does the courts at all, really. So you see the president really stepping in the foreign power a lot more. And it doesn't mean that the Congress can't can have some influence, right, with funding and control. The War Powers Act, for example, after Vietnam and all the things that happened there negative, the War Powers Act was put into place. And a lot of people go, yeah, yeah, only Congress can declare war, which is true, the declaration of war. But the War Powers Act basically, in essence, says, hey, look, you can, as the president, deploy troops, respond militarily, but you have to notify Congress within so many hours. And then that clock starts, and then we have to pass resolutions of support and this and that. So what that's done is Congress doesn't have to declare war in order to be at war. Okay, Congress can sit there and just say, well, we support it. We support the war powers resolution, saying that's fine. You can continue to do what you're doing. And then if you want more money, funding, all that, you have to keep us posted and keep us in the loop. And they can turn that off at any time. The president has 30 days to act in a war capacity, all these things. And And that's even debatable. The President of the United States, when it first passed, it was the War Powers Act was passed by the Congress only and overrode the presidential veto. But presidents will, funny enough, always kind of comply with it, but they don't acknowledge it. They say we're only doing this because we're nice people, but we don't have to, you know. And so it's kind of like the the habit and the tradition, if you will, the precedent is that these things will happen. And in essence, the law is there, but we don't acknowledge it. One side does, one doesn't, but we're still going to pretend to, all this stuff, right? So it's kind of important to really acknowledge that, that they do have that power. The courts also have some influence, like maybe there's a contract that's overseas, or there's some type of power the president's trying to project over there, and it has to be constitutionally reviewed. Um, so that can be something where the courts get involved, but they wouldn't naturally be involved like, oh, well, we're going to go overseas and do stuff ourselves, right? Congress and senators tend not to do that as well unless dispatched by the president or there's a very clear reason congressionally they're doing that, right? Which there wouldn't be a lot of reasons for that. So not to get too deep on this, but I just want everyone when you're looking at these things, really take time and think about that, and then and let me know if there's anything else I can talk about. Thank you.